Our most gracious Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the blessings of this wonderful day that you have given to each and every one of us. Father, thank you for the safe passage to be here tonight, to have your word in our hands, that we can see the truth, that we have the ability within the truth that you've given us to learn the context, to see the application, to have our lives impacted by the truth, and have the community impacted by our lives being changed in you. Father, be with us. Guide us throughout this time of study. Open our hearts and our minds to your truth. Father, we pray for those of our number who couldn't be here tonight, those that are sick, those that are dealing with different illnesses, that you comfort and strengthen them as only you can. Father, be with us all. Forgive us when we fall short of your glory. It's in Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right, so the daunting task, Joshua chapter 4. The daunting task of crossing the Jordan River has now begun. Remember, there's no bridge. They didn't start building rafts. They weren't trying to become sitting ducks, easy targets. Instead, God sends them from Acacia Grove to the banks of the Jordan River, where they're going to sit for 3 days to look at this overflowing river. Now, do you remember what else God told them to do in this moment? Very important. Sanctify yourselves. Very important. Sanctify. Separate yourself. What are they literally, is there a literal separation there that's being described? What are they supposed to separate from?
What they're thinking about.
What they're thinking about. What do you think would be lingering in their mind?
Doubt.
Well, doubt and fear for one, but their past would be a big one. Where you've come from. The hardest thing we ever have to do in moving forward in our calling is letting go of the past. We try to drag that with us and we can never really come to the fullness of our calling. But you think about that 3 days sitting there at the river. When they crossed the Red Sea in the Exodus, was there really much of a challenge to it? They came to the banks. Now, they were all upset and fearful. But what was the grand totality to be done? Moses took a staff, held it up in the air. God sent the wind, divided the Red Sea. The people crossed over. There was no stepping out into the water until the water was divided. This is different. What was their command? You've got to step in the water. In other words, you've got to get your feet wet. You see, the priests have to take this first step, a faith step. And so, I didn't really get to build on this much last week. We ran out of time. But I want you to understand that to lead us into the lesson tonight. Do you read anywhere in the Bible where God is calling us as Christians today, God-fearing people in the Bible, we use the terminology Christians. Do you read anywhere in the Bible where God says, hey, just have a passive faith, just kind of wait on the waters to divide for you? Instead, God's calling us to an active faith, not a passive faith. You think about it, well, I wish God would just show me what He wants me to do. What did He say? Go ye and make disciples. He's calling us to an active faith, not sit on the sideline in a passive faith. And so I mentioned this past week, and really it's my theme for Joshua, if you will. Faith is not just believing in light of evidence, but also obeying in spite of consequences. You're going to hear me repeat that over and over and over again. Taking that faith step. Because if we're going to be honest, all right, the evidence would say that there is zero chance that when the priests step in the water's going to stop flowing. Have they seen it? Have they ever seen somebody step in water and it just stopped flowing? No. And you think about it. Fast forward to the New Testament, the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus told the apostles, you give them food. Why couldn't the apostles make the fish and the bread? Had they ever seen it? It was outside of their purview, outside of their understanding and imagination of what they could do in the power of God. So evidence would say there's zero chance that a raging river in flood state is going to stop. A river that would sweep people away. But faith says, I'm going to step in the water if that's what God's calling me to do. And so that's something God says throughout the Bible. The Bible records for us. Did God come to Abraham and say, Abraham, I want you to just hang out where you are and you're going to be blessed. I'm going to make you a great nation right here where you are in Ur. What did He tell Abraham? Get out of the land, get out of your father's house. Go into a place that I'm going to show you. He didn't even know where it was. He just said, go. God comes to Moses. Moses, you're going to be my deliverer. What was Moses' response when God told him that? You need to find somebody else. I'm not eloquent of speech, which I'm thankful that's not the requirement for things. I heard some kind of quick laughs on that. But he had to pick up his staff and go. Joshua 1. Everywhere the soles of your feet tread upon, I have given you. What's the inference in that command, or in that statement? Move. Move. Active faith. Sometimes, believe it or not, and we don't always like to understand this or even come to the reality of this, sometimes you have to get your feet wet. And you have to have that active faith and be willing to go. So, up to this point in Joshua chapter 3, leading into 4, the Ark of the Covenant is now upon the shoulders of the Levitical priests, specifically the Kohathites, and is now leading the people across the river. But the warning was given. Could they just walk right there close by the Ark of the Covenant? Kind of some to the left, some to the right? No. Well, why? What does the Bible say? How far were they supposed to stay away from the Ark of the Covenant? 2,000 cubits, 3,000 feet. So stay half a mile away from the Ark of the Covenant. You didn't look at it. You didn't touch it. There was always some separation between you and that Ark. In the Holies of Holies, there was a big veil in front of you where you couldn't see it. You couldn't touch it. You definitely didn't want to touch it. One day a year, you could go, if you're the high priest, into the Ark of the Covenant to sprinkle blood. But again, I think I mentioned this past week. The rabbinical writings, they even recorded. When they did that, they had a rope tied around them. So that if they died in the Holies of Holies, you could drag them out because you couldn't go in and get them. But it was to that level of understanding and reverence around the Ark of the Covenant. You didn't go to the Ark. There was separation between the people and the Ark. What's the only thing that removed that separation? Christ. That's the only thing that ripped the veil. Removed the veil. But the warning sign here was given, stay back 3,000 feet. Now, for Israel, this is going to be very important. One, they've been waiting on this calling. But two, if the ark is going to go in front of you, what's the natural lesson to learn? Who's leading you if the call is, hey, you follow the ark? God. God's doing this. God's giving the deliverance. He's going to lead you across the river. He's going to lead you into Jericho, throughout all Palestine. Joshua says in verse 10 of chapter 3, he says, by this you'll know that the living God is among you. By this being this wondrous miracle that's about to unfold. But it's that specific phrase I want you to think about, the living God. And we are going to get to chapter 4. Why do you think it's always specifically mentioned living God?
Because you get the pagan gods who were non-existent.
Well, where's Israel going?
To pagan lands.
You're going into the heart of pagan land. Now, you think about it, they've come out of pagan land. They brought a lot of pagan land with them. But they're going into pagan land. It says, listen, you're sanctifying yourself on this side of the river, and then you're going to understand that it's the living God taking you into the promised land, where they have idols, they have statues of idols, they have these little figurines. You remember Laban when Jacob and Rachel were leaving? Laban chased them down. Why did you steal my gods? Well, that's some impressive gods that could just be stolen. But you think about Psalm 115, it talks about those. You have these gods, these little statues that have ears, but they don't hear. They have eyes, they don't see. They're nothing but figurines. But this is where they're going into. This is the land. So the emphasis upon the living God is doing this. So the priests take the ark, they walk off into the water. The passage tells us that up north near the city of Adam, the water rose on a heap, which basically means the water just hit a mountain. Like it stops. And it just keeps rising and rising. On this side, it's done. It's dry. But actually, when it says they crossed over on dry ground, to understand the magnitude of the miracle, it doesn't just say that, hey, the water stopped. Because if the water just stopped and you're walking across, what do you expect the ground to still be like? Muddy. But when it says dry ground, it's describing a dusty environment. Every bit of water was gone from it. It was dry. They didn't get muddy. Things like that don't happen. Now, it is interesting, if you're curious, if you're a critic of this passage, you've got to come up with some way to talk down the miraculous. And so the grand conclusion of the matter for critics is, well, this wasn't miraculous, this wasn't God. What happened is an earthquake happened. And so the earth opened up, swallowed up the water, they were able to cross over, and then finally just filled up enough where it went back to flowing. Now, that sounds ridiculous. In reality, it's happened twice. It happened in the 1200s where an earthquake happened, the banks shook, the banks basically came down in the river, it dammed it up for like 10 hours. It happened again in the early 1926 or 27, and it dammed it up again from an earthquake almost a full day. Problem is, none of those were in the flood season where the banks were overflowing with massive amounts of water. None of those happened at the exact moment a priest carrying an ark stepped into the water, and none of them resumed flowing the second the priest stepped out of the riverbed. So, hard to make that comparison. Is it hard in your mind to comprehend something like God stopping a river?
He created the rivers and stopped them.
Well, that's kind of the cheat code answer. He created them.
Yeah. He has control over all nature. I'm always impressed with the calm and the storm and the waves.
It's amazing. Nature obeys. Nature obeys its creator. But I've been asked that question before. Do you really think God could do this or God did this? And I said, yes, this is easy. Well, why is that? Because I know what Genesis 1:1 says. And when I understand what Genesis 1:1 says, everything else gets easy.
When I look at what Jesus did, you want undisputable proof that Jesus is God. Think about this. He was able to calm that storm. He was on the Sea of Galilee. He was able to calm that storm with just a few words. God created nature and He can control it.
So as we come into chapter 4, God is moving in a big way. So we see the miracle, but now you're going to learn a lesson in chapter 4. Chapter 4 is a very practical and important lesson for us. This carries a lot of weight for us tonight. So I'm going to really emphasize application as we go throughout chapter 4. So look at verse 1 as we begin. And it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua. All right, so I want to emphasize something real quick before we get into verse 2. We don't know exactly how many people crossed the river. Estimates from 2 million, 2.5, 3 million. It's a lot of people. And so I want you to understand the time frame that it takes to accomplish this. 2 million people crossing the river, just the logistics of the entire thing, even with a wide path being formed. I want you to see it. See it as we start talking about it, as the water's just piling up upriver. But you remember back in chapter 3, I told you there's a statement that we're going to come back to, where God told Joshua, choose you 12 men, one of each tribe. I said, hold on to that verse. We're going to come back to it. This is where we come back to in verse 2. He repeats what he said in chapter 3. Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from every tribe, and command them, saying, take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. So this seems sort of odd now, doesn't it? First off, why is it important to have a person from every tribe do this?
Because there's 12 tribes.
Okay, but just get 12 guys. You need 12 stones, just get 12 guys.
It's just a representative from each tribe.
A representative. So if you have a representative from each tribe doing this, what now is the result of setting up this memorial? Everybody's a part of it. No, you can't say, well, I'm from Benjamin. I'm like the smallest tribe. I don't have any part of this. Everybody has a part. Every tribe has a part in what's being set up here. Every tribe is going to have a part in teaching what it means. Every group is going to be represented. Because this is important, to teach them what's happened so that they can remember and teach so that everyone remembers what God has done. Something that becomes abundantly apparent to you when you get into ministry, I don't think I ever saw this before, is you see one of the biggest struggles people deal with is remembering. Now, people remember challenging times. Like you remember the hardest moment, the biggest, what we would call catastrophic events in our lives. We remember those. But when you start asking somebody, well, has God blessed you? Well, I'm sure He has. I couldn't really tell you how. I don't really know. You see, we struggle remembering the blessing side, but we can remember the downside. So this idea of remembering is very important, even to understand how blessed they are, to understand how blessed we are, even to be where we are in this country, to be able to worship without the fear of persecution. You hear it all the time, the poorest of our country are wealthier than pretty much every other country. God's been good to us. But who's most often to blame when something's wrong?
Poor people.
What?
People tend to blame God.
People blame God. So, when things are going great and you're blessed and you're on the mountaintop, who got you there? By people's perception? They did. And then when you get knocked down to the valley, what's the statement that you hear so often?
Why
Why
did God do this?
did God do this? God didn't do this, but why did God do this? What does that tell you the problem is? We don't remember. We don't remember. And so you ask the question, well, how are we so blessed today? All you've got to do is look at the cross. You don't have to look any further than the cross, but you can get into the personal aspects of how you're blessed. But eternally speaking, all you got to do is look to the cross. In fact, the Bible makes a great emphasis on us remembering. That's why God's given this message to Joshua. Joshua, take 12 stones with you from the river to the place where you lodge. It didn't say Joshua's got to be this big, got to be this big. The language implies that the rocks were big enough they had to be carried on a shoulder. So they're good-sized stones. They're not a little pebble you're going to carry. But you're going to carry these 12 stones and you're going to go to the place where you lodge, which is Gilgal. You're going to go there and you're going to set up this memorial, which is 6-7 miles west of the Jordan. You're not just carrying this big stone like a couple hundred feet and dropping it. You're carrying this for miles. And you're going to make this memorial. Now, Gilgal, I will say, if you've never studied any of these old cities in the Jerusalem or the Canaan conquest, Gilgal is a very important city in the life of Israel. It's going to be where they camp coming into the promised land. It's going to be where King Saul is going to be. The very first King Saul is crowned at Gilgal. David's kingship is restored at Gilgal after Absalom's overthrow. So Gilgal is very important. Samuel when he set up the school of prophets, he would spend a lot of time going through Gilgal. So it comes up a lot in the Old Testament. But I like the look of this. 12 stones you're going to set up in a memorial. If God's going to set up a memorial, or you are going to set up a memorial for something pretty important, what would you use? Just quick question. What would you use? Would you use 12 rocks? When they built the temple, was the temple just a stone building? Gold, ornate. I love how simple this is because the story is so much more important than the monument itself. And then you get into the grandeur of the temple and the gold lace of the temple itself. Was that what God was ever really after? No.
It already is anyhow.
It's already is. In fact, what they used to make the temple so ornate when you get to the New Testament so that we can understand the language. Everybody says, well, the streets of gold in heaven. Well, again, we're trying to use language that we can understand. So to make us understand what he says, when you were so important with decking the temple out, it's asphalt, it's pavement in heaven. But this memorial is just so simple because the story is what's important. So, Joshua, verse 4, he called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. So, this is Joshua just repeating the instructions here to give it to these 12 men. I think we've addressed that pretty well. But there's another reason that this is happening. They're setting up a memorial so that they will remember what's happened But this is where this is really going to transfer now to application. He's about to tell us why. Men, well, everybody prepare, but men, this is about to get thrown at our feet. All right, and it's not going to be fun when you actually stop and think about how we're doing in what's being said here. So let's find out why. That this may be a sign among you. Great, so that you'll remember. But that's not where he stops. When your children ask in time to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever. Listen, this is a major moment in the history of Israel. I mean, they are miraculously crossing into Canaan. They probably thought this day would never come. Carry the stones, build the memorial so that you can remember what God did in getting you across the river. It's a simple memorial. It's not nothing grand, not covered in gold. A simple memorial with an important message. But it's not just about remembering, not for the group of Israelites. It's about teaching. So that when the kids ask, and their kids ask, and their kids ask, you could tell them about the faithfulness and the ability of God. How God led you across the riverbed with this major overflowing river, and you didn't even get muddy. You can tell them about this. Question. Did God just say, build the memorial so that your kids can hopefully learn on their own about God? Hopefully they can figure out who God is. And maybe if they're lucky, they can figure out what God's desire for their life is. Maybe they'll put the pieces together. Or did God say that there was a responsibility to teach them about God? The answer, I would say, is pretty obvious there. The instruction was to teach. And the children of Israel did so. Just as Joshua commanded, they took up the 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and they laid them down there. So, the people have crossed over. The plans for the first memorial are now complete, but this is the first part. This part gets more attention than part two. I'm sure you've heard this part before. I don't believe this is going to be a new revelation to anybody, but part two has always fascinated me, really more than this, because now Joshua does something pretty fascinating. And when you put the pieces together, it'll really blow your mind when you think about how this now translates into the New Testament. It is something you would never see. We would never know had it not have been recorded for us, as the Lord does in giving us His Word. Now we're going to read about a second memorial put up in a very unique place. Verse 9. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priest who bore the Ark of the Covenant stood, and they are there to this day. I love this verse. So, who knows this memorial is going in? Did it say Joshua got 12 more men to come help him, and they did all this? Remember, everybody's crossing 3,000 feet away. Joshua's doing this all over here by himself. So he knows, and obviously the priests that are standing there holding the ark, they know. But who else actually knows what's going on here?
The 12 men who placed the stones.
He didn't get 12 men. Joshua knows. God knows. He didn't get help. It doesn't say. It says Joshua, first person specific. Joshua got 12 stones. I would say this is the obvious question. Why put a memorial in the riverbed that's about to be consumed by water where no one will ever see it?
It's for God.
What was that?
It's for God. It's not for anybody else, it's for God.
Yes, and who's the only other person? Joshua. He did that for God. Because, again, did the Bible tell us God instructed Joshua to do this?
No.
God instructed Joshua to have the 12 men get the 12 taken to Gilgal. Joshua's doing this on his own. Now, why you put stones in a river that you're never going to see, I don't know. Those stones could be there to this very day. We would have no way of knowing. We're 3,400 years later. This is around 1400 BC that this is happening. We're 3,400 years later. Erosion's probably got them at this point. But I love the reason that he does this, because Joshua will know they're there. He does this. This is him honoring God and doing this. And you think about it, several times in chapter 1, God kept telling Joshua, be strong and of good courage. Be strong and of good courage. The people of the 2.5 tribes of men, they tell Joshua, be strong and of good courage. And I ask you the question, who normally needs to hear something like that? Someone needing encouragement. Someone not feeling very courageous. And now he just set up his own memorial. So what do you think? And we've got to be careful going down this line, because now we're just thinking, getting past what it says. What do you think Joshua now is going to remember when he looks at the river? I know what I would think of every time I looked at the river. I would remember those 12 stones I put in the water. I would think about what God did, because I did that.
And I would say it's still there.
Likely. I don't know. Well, we're going to get into why I find this so amazing. I did hear one preacher put it this way, and I don't know how contextual it is, but I love the symbolism of it. So again, this is another one you've got to be careful trying to let the application set the context. But I like the lesson. He says, or he said it this way: what Joshua was doing in burying these stones in the rivers, he's burying Israel's past. There's a good application. Really, that application ties back into the sanctification part of it. They're moving forward. I get that. But now I have heard this, and I thought this was pretty interesting. Others say that, well, this represents the symbolism of, the salvation that's coming, the death of Christ. Well, Joshua had no clue about this. But again, there's a great level of symbolism, being buried under the water. Baptism is the recreation of that, Romans 6:4. So, knowing that there's a lot of symbolism we could draw from this, but again, we don't want to drift too far away from the contextual aspect of this. Now, I do believe there's a very specific purpose. Not because it sounds good, but because of what's going to happen 1,500 years from this point. And 1,500 years from this moment that Joshua buries these 12 stones in the river, another man's going to come out of the mountains to the banks of the Jordan River to start teaching about repentance and baptizing in the Jordan River. He goes to a town called Bethabara. Everybody knows who this is, who I'm talking about?
John the Baptist?
John the Baptist. He goes to Bethabara, which is the same place Jesus is going to come, and he's going to be baptized. Do you know what Bethabara means? Bethabara means a place beyond the Jordan, the place of crossing. What crossing?
The 12 stones.
Where they just crossed. So, where God miraculously dries up the river for them to cross, 1,500 years from now, John the Baptist is going to come to that same location and start preaching repentance. I should have put a map up there where you can see it. If you look on the map, if you go to the Dead Sea, go up just a little bit, you'll see it. You'll see Bethabara on the east side. So the priest, I guess I better get the text up. So the priest who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua, and the people hurried across the river. Then it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed the river, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people. Again, we don't know how long this took. I imagine there's some tired priests having to stand there holding this ark. You got to think, just based on the size 4.5, 2.5 feet, it's not, you're not talking about a big ark, but gold laid, the lid solid gold. I mean, you're several hundred pounds. The estimate is around 600 pounds. And you think about them, I find the humor in this, you may not. I think about them sitting there holding the ark, watching Joshua put this 12 stones down, like, hey, you about finished? Just getting kind of heavy. But they move. So they're done, the people have crossed over. Now we're going to go back in history a little bit, and we're picking back up on what we began talking about at the end of chapter 1, because now we're setting the stage for the Canaanite conquest to begin. So verse 12, and the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed before the children of Israel as Moses had spoken to them. Why separate these 2.5 tribes?
They were on the other side of the river.
Well, they're all on the other side.
Yeah.
They wanted to stay on.
They want to stay on the other side. They don't want to go into Canaan. They want to stay right where they are. And that's the arrangement that they've made. They took the 2 lands belonging to Sihon and Og. They want to stay there. They want to separate themselves. And I always emphasize this point because that was so dumb. Who are the first tribes to fall into paganism?
Reuben and the
Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Let's see if we can put this, let's see if we put our minds together, if we can figure out how all this unfolded. 2.5 tribes isolated themselves from the rest of their brethren, and they were the first ones to fall into paganism. People ask why I say it was dumb that they did that. Question, not related to this. Why do you think we have the church? Just general question. Why have the church? Why have an assembly of people like this? What did you say?
For encouragement and support.
For encouragement. I heard in the book. Nick, what'd you say?
strength and growth.
You hear this phrase all the time, strength in
Numbers.
numbers. We're not isolated ourselves. I hear people say, and I'm trying to control my language. I hear people say ridiculous all the time. I wish Satan would come up after me. I wish you have that over there by yourself. Don't bring that to me. But do you want to go up against the world of Satan? Satan's the prince of this world. By yourself? Or with the sword and a whole army? No, I want my brothers and sisters with me because when I struggle, I need help. They separated themselves. They're going to... Anyway, we've got to get back on track. That was a separate point.
You think about why we come together as a congregation, why we have the church. In Hebrews chapter 10, 25, it says, not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together as is the manner of the Son, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Exhortation means when we are here together worshiping God, we are exhorting one another because we're building each other up. It's not just worshiping God. I mean, our focus is supposed to be on worshiping God, but because we are worshiping God in unison, all of us benefit equally.
Well, when you hear the verse, not forsaking the assembly, you notice how the verse says, hey, don't forsake the assembly, because when you're here on Sunday morning, God's got his checkboard and he's checking off roll to make sure you came. It says, don't forsake the assembly. There's a purpose for being in the assembly. You said, right, exhorting one another. We're here to worship, but in that exhortation, we're exhorting each other. We're building each other up. There was an old guy, great old man. I thought the world of him. He always had a lot of wisdom in the little sayings he would always give me. And I know it wasn't original to him, but it was one of his favorite sayings was, 1 week makes 1 week. You know, you don't go to church a week, you become weak. Well, because you weren't being exhorted. You weren't being lifted up and encouraged. So, you got 2.5 tribes. That's not even really part of this verse, but they're going to learn this lesson and not in the too distant future. So the deal was that they agreed that the 2.5 can stay on the east side of the river, but they have to send fighting men. The women and the children, of course, are going to stay back. The animals, the livestock, they're going to stay back. And then when Israel is at rest, then they can return home. So verse 13 says that 40,000 prepared for war. That's 40,000 from the 2.5 tribes. They prepared for war, crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. Numbers 26 says there was about 139,000 fighting men of those. So you do the math. About, what is that? 1/3 goes crosses and 2/3 stays back. Because, this isn't a hard question to answer. If every fighting man leaves the women and children on the east side of the river, and you go across, what did you just do to these 2.5 tribes over here? You just left them unprotected. You just left them vulnerable. Anybody can now come in with an army, and they're going to take them. So you leave some back. That's kind of common sense, I would say. Let's see. All right, I'm going to read through verse. I've got 17 and 18 on the screen. I'm going to start in verse 14. I was going to skip these, but I want to just read the verses. Verse 14, on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they feared Moses all the days of his life. What does that mean, feared? Revered. There was respect. Where they weren't scared, there was a fear. You always have to be careful with reverence. There's only one reverent being, one deserving of reverence. I tell the story. I went and spoke at this cross event, and it was people from all over that were there. So there were a lot of denominational folks. They actually did a big news article write-up, and they had my name in there. They listed me as Reverend Justin Ozen. I call them, you've got to change this. I don't care. Some titles you put on there, I don't care. I don't carry those titles. There's only one I care about you associating with me. Do not call me Reverend. There's only one reverent one, and that's God. No man should ever carry that title. Anyways, I digress. Too many side lessons. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, command the priest who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. So now verse 17. Joshua therefore commanded the priest, saying, come up from the Jordan. And it came to pass, when the priest who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priest's feet touched dry land. Listen to this last phrase. That the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before. So the miraculous crossing is done. It's over. Everybody's crossed over. Now, just as amazing to me is that last statement. If you're going to say, because you're in the Kidron Valley, earthquakes are common. You've got the tectonic plates. That's why you got a whole big valley that runs through there. Earthquakes are common, but would you have an earthquake that caused the waters to stop and all of a sudden it comes back at its rate before it ever stopped, overflowing again, like nothing had ever happened? Immediately the water went back, not just to flowing, it didn't just fill up a big cavern and now it started to trickle back over. It went right back to overflowing its banks. The dam that was holding it back, which was the power of God, was lifted. Reaffirming to the people that God was doing this in the first place. It wasn't some earthquake. The living God, the language is very specific here to use that phraseology. The living God is the one that did this for Israel. So the people took the step. They walked in an act of faith. But now comes the point of this, landing the plane and really what we've already addressed in the instructions. It's not just enough to be active. It's being active in our faith, not just in any faith in the living God. So we're going to go full circle. I do want to bring this verse. I was going to skip this one, but I couldn't skip it. I'm just curious if any language sounds familiar to you in this verse. If you say no, I'm going to throw my presenter tool at you. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. I'm going to mention some phrases excitedly, so hopefully you'll get the clue. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal, the east border of Jericho. Did you notice any phrase in there that might be significant? That should sound familiar to you? Don't say no.
No.
Was it Noah's days?
So we talked about, I guess you got excuse. You weren't here Sunday morning. Sunday, we talked about this, that when Jesus makes his way into Jerusalem, it was on a very specific day. The 10th day of the first month of Nisan. What happened on the 10th day of the first month of Nisan every year from the Exodus forward until the coming of
The
Christ?
fall of Jericho.
Passover.
The Passover. Well, the beginning of the preparations for Passover began. But that day very specifically was the day that you went and you selected your lamb. That was the day that Jesus came into Jerusalem, 10th day of Nisan. It's the same day that every Jew, at least the head of the family, because you would sacrifice a lamb for the family, you went and you selected your lamb on the 10th day of Nisan. This day shows up over and over and over and over and over again in the Bible. If something's being repeated over and over and over, do you think it might be significant?
Yeah.
Yes. So, very significant, which we'll get into this more willing this Sunday. Those 12 stones, verse 20, which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children... Okay, all right, I got to stop. Men, listen to this, please. Women, you're not exempt from this. You have just as much of this as men do. But the men, I really want to listen to this. All right? I hate stopping mid-verse. I apologize. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their fathers, in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land. Who was supposed to tell these kids about the miraculous power of God? Because you say that they crossed over on dry ground. That's a generalization of the entire event that just happened. So really when it says, tell them you crossed over on dry ground, is tell them what happened. Describe the event that just unfolded for them. But who was supposed to do this?
Fathers.
No, I'm pretty sure y'all read that wrong. I'm pretty sure it says, it is your preacher's job at the local church to teach your... No. I think that's that Good News Bible. I don't think I have the Good News Bible with me today. Maybe it was that it's the Sunday schools teach... No.
I'm pretty sure it's fathers, sir.
I don't think that's right.
No, I'm pretty sure it is.
And you're running out of time.
Am I?
Yes, you are.
First bell's already rung.
Is it really?
Yes, Marshall's.
So, I thought with Glenn not being here, I might be able to sneak a few more minutes out of it.
Yeah, that's right.
When your children ask their fathers. So fathers, yes. Women, do you think you're exempt from that statement? No. Parents are supposed to teach their kids about God. It's parents' responsibility to teach their kids about God.
Amen.
And this is an area where a lot of Christians struggle. I've struggled there. I can even admit at my own failings that I don't do enough there. I should be doing more, but if we all actually stop and think about it, we all could probably do more there. So you've got a non-special looking memorial, just 12 stones, with an extremely important message. And that memorial will not matter one bit if the kids are not taught what it means. That's the whole lesson here, basically. Verse 23 and 24, you're kind of just getting the summation now. This is what they're supposed to tell them. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before, listen to this word, before us until we had crossed over. Why would us be significant in that statement?
Joshua was included in that. Joshua.
First person plural. First person plural. Therefore, can we question now who the author is? Who are the only two that we know crossed over the Red Sea and the Jordan?
Joshua and Caleb.
Joshua and Caleb. The only two we know. That all the peoples of the earth, verse 24, may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. There's that word again, fear. Is he saying that you may be afraid of God? What's the language there implying? Reverence. That you'll have that reverent respect for God. I thought we'd have a couple extra minutes tonight.
You ain't cutting my time.
Oh, you got the Devo?